All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, whether it's today, this morning, tonight for you. It really is an honor for us to host you. Welcome to today's Maximizing the Benefits of ERP Changes webinar. Thank you for joining us. We're so excited that you're here, and I know that you're going to leave our time together brimming with knowledge, questions, and more clarity when it comes to your ERP migration or upgrade in relation to a Coupa implementation. So although you're going to be drinking from a fire hose, so to speak, during our time together, we really would love to hear from you. And so please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. We'll do our very best to get to all of them at the end during our Q&A session. And if we don't get to your question before time is up, please don't panic. Your questions really matter to us. So one of our experts will reach out to you after the webinar to answer your questions. My name is Ren. I'll be your host for today. I handle business development and lead generation for supply chain partners. It's great to meet you. You would have received a reminder email about the webinar today. In that mail is a white paper and a Q&A document as a pre-read for this event. If you didn't do your homework and didn't pre-read, that's okay. It just summarizes the discussion today, and you can check it out after the webinar. Just to give you an order of events so you know what's happening today, our first speaker, Emil, who's our Coupa practice lead, will suggest that it may well make sense to implement an ERP connected app, specifically Coupa in this case, at the same time or prior to upgrading or changing your ERP system. Then we'll be playing a video. I did an interview with Chris Quartermanch of Glencore. He'll give us a customer perspective on this position. And he'll be followed by Chris Clark from Coupa, who'll talk to the question of how this may or may not make financial sense for you. And the man who will be interviewing Mr. Clark, I'd like to introduce you to him now. Richard Hales, General Manager for Supply Chain Partner UK, looking after Europe. How are you, Richard? Good to see you.
Very well, thanks, Ren, and thank you very much for the introduction. I just really wanted to just play one slide, really, to introduce Supply Chain Partner to you. I'm going to pop that on the screen now. And this is really, without reading through all the bullets on the screen, Supply Chain Partner is a procurement specialist implementation company. And we implement Coupa amongst other things, and do it in a really good way. And you might think, well, there's a bad way, and actually, yeah, there is. I mean, one of the core strengths of Coupa is it's enormously configurable. You can do all sorts of things with Coupa, and so as a consequence, it's a good idea to do it well and do it right. Supply Chain Partner's been doing it well and doing it right for 9 years. The company was founded by procurement specialists. They're still looking after the business today. Company's kind of doubled just about every year since it was founded, and now we have, as you can see from the chart there, we've got implementations and people in lots of different places around the world. So that's really all I wanted to say in terms of an introduction to Supply Chain Partner. I'm going to hand you back to Ren now as we get into the meat of this event. Back to you, Ren. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that intro to the SCP. Folks, let's dive right in. I want to honor your time. Really grateful that you're here. So with that said, I'd like to call to the stage, if you like, Emil Olkers. Emil is Associate Director at Supply Chain Partner, specifically looking after Coupa operations in the African and European regions. Emil, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Good. So Emil, Gartner recently stated, and I quote, "There will be a tsunami of SAP S/4HANA adoption between 2021 and 2023. So with that said, what are the challenges facing companies who need to migrate or upgrade their ERP from a Coupa perspective, specifically SAP ECC to S/4HANA?
Well, Ren, it depends on the type of migration that you're doing. So if you typically migrate from one ERP brand to the next, your challenges might be significantly more than when you migrate from a version of an ERP to the next version on one brand. So what I'll do today is just cover kind of, to start off with, the generic challenges or a couple that I call the ghosts of ERP implementations, because they often go unnoticed. People do not pay enough attention to these things, but they have a significant impact if not handled correctly. And then I'll just touch on a couple of things from an SAP point of view, especially procurement, because that's where we specialize. So if we look at the general kind of challenges that often go unnoticed, I think that the first one is lack of ownership in a migration project. And that is often comes to be because there's an ERP touches a wide variety of your business, if not all business or areas in your business. And because of that, there's often misaligned goals and expectations of what this ERP migration will bring. And unfortunately, to cater for all expectations, you often have a challenge where the budget that you have for this type of migration just is not enough to cater for all that. And that means that there's a compromise to be had. And now you have the difficult task of deciding who compromises and how much they compromise. And because you have business units that do not necessarily share certain expectations or certain goals, you might have people stepping back and handing over or trying to hand over ownership to other people. And that's got a knock-on effect, because when it comes to key decision making, you would want all those people to participate and to be very active in the project so that you make the right decisions for that business. The next thing that also plays a role is capacity of key business users. So oftentimes the users that need to be involved in the project also need to do a day-to-day job. Your key stakeholders typically are people that are key role players in your day-to-day business. And as a result, there's just not enough capacity for those resources. And again, there's a compromise to be had around how much they do on a project and how much they do in the day-to-day job. And if you don't get that balance right, then it's very much the same impact as the misaligned goals, where some information is not fed into your design effectively and on time. Then I'd say the last thing is data cleansing, or the effort that you have to clean data, to standardize data, and then also to migrate data, especially if you look at transactional data. The effort that goes into those things and the complexity sitting inside of data management on a migration project is enormous, and it's often underestimated. And you only kind of get into realizing that the challenge you've got when you dive into the details. Then looking at SAP specifically, I'd say new functions and features play quite a big role with SAP, because they've got what they call SAP Fiori that comes into play when we do an integration or migration from ECC to S4. Fiori is basically an application that sits on top of the can I call it the SAP base or SAP base platform that makes user interaction a little bit easier with the system. So instead of having to remember the old transaction codes, for those of you that know SAP, to get to certain activities, you can now click on a tile on the user interface. But the implication with that is that some functionality now or old functionality that was located in the base platform is now split across these two. So when you start, or if you decide to use SAP Fiori, then some design challenges arise, and to make that work, you have to spend some effort and change what you had in the past. Also, if some of the kind of new functionality in SAP is not something you want to use, you might still have to cater for the fact that the design has now been changed to not all be located in the same places as it was before. Then the next thing on SAP is the whole thing about customizations. So I don't think there's any SAP environment in the world that has not got an extreme amount or a significant amount of customization done to it to make it work specifically for that organization that's implemented it. So all these customizations, again, need to be reviewed and challenged for validity moving on to S4, because functionality changes, and it might be that these customizations are no longer required. And even if they are required, there'll most likely be some changes required to them to make them work in the new environment. And then, I think the last thing is looking at procurement specifically. I know that there's some business structure changes. So in the ECC environment, you've got suppliers and you've got customers, and typically in S4, they've now combined that into being a business partner object. So there's a lot of functionality that comes with that makes it a really nice feature. But it also means that you have to now deal with a different way of working with these two objects going forward, now being one.
Yeah, Emil, very helpful. Sounds sounds to me like simply slapping new tech onto broken or non-optimal processes may not be the greatest idea. So the ERP upgrade may be a great time to relook processes and potentially redesign target operating models. And I'm hearing change management and stakeholder buy-in are key during this process. Are there any benefits associated with implementing Coupa ahead of or in parallel to an ERP change or upgrade, rather than to wait until after the ERP project is complete?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say whether you want to do it together with your upgrade or before, basically it depends on the timing of when you plan to do your ERP upgrade. But no matter which one of those two you want to go for, there's always a lot more benefit to opting for one of those than to do it after your ERP migration. These benefits typically are things like you being able to design one solution from a user point of view. So even though you've got two software platforms, an end user will get used to a new process that flows in between these two softwares. That limits change fatigue as well, because you don't have a scenario where you have to get used to your new ERP environment and a couple of months later someone now bolts on another tool onto it, so you change the way you do things completely again. That change management or change fatigue also applies to your suppliers, especially if you look at procurement. So it's not only your internal users that get impacted by that. Then the next thing is that you can reduce a lot of rework, because you don't have, similar to, I suppose, the change experience, you don't have one design that again needs to be tweaked, integrations that need to be tweaked, software that needs to be, or connected apps that need to be tweaked to make the new solution with the two software platforms work. And then there's even a cost saving to be had, I think, from an implementation point of view, because some shared functions like change management and project management, you can basically run in parallel when you do these two implementations or softwares at once. So your cost is not exponential because of a repeat of project timelines. And then I'd say the last thing, and should not be underestimated, Coupa specifically, is you can get all the Coupa benefits into your organization earlier. So all the cost saving opportunities, all the efficiency opportunities, whatever the pain points or the opportunities are that you saw that made you look to a solution like Coupa to start off with, you can get into an environment a lot sooner than if you wait till after your ERP migration.
Yeah, that's very interesting. One would think that two implementations concurrently would be more painful, but it's really interesting to hear that it makes sense from a people, process, and cost perspective, that parallel implementation. In the case of SAP, how is the data and end user experience affected, if at all, during such an upgrade?
Yeah, so if you've got Coupa on your ECC environment and then upgrade to S4, it means that, well, I suppose there's two scenarios again. So if you had an optimization exercise when implementing Coupa with your ECC environment, and your move to S4 is simply a system change to a large extent, then the chances are good that your user experience in Coupa is going to be almost, or the change to the user experience is going to be almost nothing. People might have a scenario where some data cleanup has been done, and they might have a drop down with a few less options or a few new options, or whatever the scenario might be. But look and feel and process and experience will remain exactly the same. And then again, even if you do optimization when moving from ECC to S4, if you had Coupa before, you still work in a Coupa environment going forward. So the UI is familiar. You might have obviously scenarios where you have some approval workflows that change. Again, you might have some new fields you have to fill in as an end user. You might even have to fill in one or two new forms every now and then, but the environment within which you are working is still familiar and should bring a kind of a bit of comfort.
Yeah, wonderful, Emil. Thank you. There's so much demystifying what you shared with us there. Really appreciate your insights.
Cool.
Great. All right, folks. Unfortunately, Chris Kortemansch, as I mentioned in the beginning, from Glencore, couldn't join us today, but we recorded him on this webinar on Tuesday. And so, Richard, if you could bring up that video so we can hear what Mr. Kortemansch had to say, which is incredibly insightful. I'd appreciate that. I'd like to again welcome to our stage Mr. Chris Kordemansch, Innovation Manager and Cooper Lead at Glencore. Chris, are you with us?
I am. I am here. How are you doing?
Welcome.
Nice to see you again, Ren.
Yeah, you too, Chris. All right. A couple of questions for you, Chris. What is your experience of Cooper and an ERP migration? Maybe talk a bit of the value and the pains. And I'll tell you, we here, we don't need Cooper, or we won't need Cooper once we've implemented SAP S/4HANA. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think SAP is great at a lot of things, but there's certainly some gaps, and that's where Coupa comes in. So I think it's just about finding the right mix. You know, there's for example, not a great interface for suppliers to interact directly with SAP. So you know, everyone's going to come to the conclusion that you know, if you want to take it to the next level and really engage with your suppliers and increase performance of delivery and engagement with the supplier, increase your catalog spend and your accuracy. I mean, you just need another tool. You need some sort of a cloud software where you can interact with suppliers on the same platform, and that's certainly where we landed. Yeah. In terms of an ERP upgrade, look, I think we've done both. We implemented Coupa across 3 different SAP environments and some non-SAP environments back in 2018, and we've also done an S4 upgrade after being live on Coupa, and we're also in the midst of in parallel S4 upgrade and Coupa implementation. So we've done them all. I think one of the things that we've learned is if you implement the project and you have the same resources in the project, and then you know, a few months later move towards a Coupa project, you end up with a bit of fatigue in your key resources, right? So you're bringing in SMEs from the business, you're bringing in key individuals that you know, that know the business, they're respected by their peers, and those are the people that you want on the project. But if you put them in back-to-back projects, we get a bit of fatigue. That's in our experience anyway. So there is some value to doing it in parallel. Certainly increases the complexity. So I would also say, you know, that you want to make sure that you look at your timeline and you've got the right timeline. Certainly if it's a global project across multiple ERPs, you know, different types of businesses, then yeah, you just really have to be cautious that you're taking on a lot at once, and you need to make sure that to put that correct timeline in place, or potentially stagger the rollouts. So those are a couple sort of points of, you know, the difference between those types of projects. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Chris. How do you at Glencore upgrade resources with varying degrees of skill and experience across the businesses during projects like this?
Yeah, so, you know, we always take the approach, this is really not just purely a technology project, it has to be a business project. I think that's a real key point, and it should be a driver in the project. So that means engaging the business, and that means going into the operations and taking those individuals that have that influence, like I was mentioning, pulling them onto the project and upskilling them. So it also means selecting a good SI and making sure that they're working hand in hand and side by side, so that knowledge transfer happens during the project. Once you go live, those resources become even more important to the organization, because they're passing that knowledge on to other folks in the site, and you can leverage that during those early months when, you know, you're in hypercare and you're trying to stabilize the environment. So I think that's key. Also, you know, for us, we've done both approaches, face to face, and we've done remote projects, and we really stumbled on doing things remotely, especially in terms of knowledge transfer. You know, you try to do a training session over the web, and you know, the reality is people are just doing a number of other things while the training is happening, and they're not fully focused. They're also maybe not, you know, raising their hand and answering questions. It's not interactive. So yeah, so I mean, we've learned we'll never do another remote project. It has to be face to face, at least at the key points of the project. You know, the design workshops, the end user testing, all of that, all of those key points of the project. You really need to get together as a group and make sure that those key individuals are in there that will help drive this throughout the business.
Yeah, it's good. Very insightful. We may have covered this in a sense, but perhaps just to hear again, if it makes sense to you to implement Coupa sooner rather than later, for instance, not wait 3 or 4 years down the road until the SAP or the ERP project is done.
So I think there's if you're going to wait, you know, you're really losing out on the value. So in my sense, I'm always rushing to get it in as soon as possible, because you get the value out of it. Once you put Coupa in, at least as far as our approach on the business, we always try to keep users in Coupa, and we really keep them out of the, you know, at least in terms of a supply chain process. Certainly maintenance remains in SAP, but those users that are working within Coupa, there's relatively little change when you do an upgrade down the road, because most of their work will continue to happen in Coupa. So it's really just, you know, remapping some of the files and in the back end and that sort of thing, but the business process remains the same. So, and it's relatively inexpensive to do the upgrade, because you're just really validating the mapping. The environment's already set up, the configuration is already there, and for the most part, it's you know you're off to the races. So the challenge in that second project where you're upgrading to S4 is relatively low if you've already got Coupa in place.
Yeah, that's good. Very helpful. And then can you give us some insights into how the market and Glencore in particular is responding to the need to move to S4?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it within our company today. We're getting a lot of momentum to continue to roll it out. So we've rolled it out in North America. We've gone through to South America. We've rolled it out in Africa last year, and we're working on some sites in Europe today. So I'm seeing the momentum. There's, you know, it's like I was saying earlier, there's just some gaps, you know, in terms of, especially around engaging suppliers and increasing your on-contract spend. You know, there's just some gaps in how SAP operates. It's a wonderful tool. It's a great finance tool. It's a great maintenance tool. But in terms of engaging with suppliers, you know, there's some gaps. So yeah, we're seeing that driver across our business, that's for sure.
Okay, that was Chris Quarterman, and sorry to say we had to have Chris as a recording. He just messaged me right before the session to say really sorry that he's unable to make it at very short notice for personal reasons. So luckily we have the video. So next on the agenda, I'd like to introduce Chris Clark of Coupa, who looks after business value engineering. But Chris, you please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and hi, everyone. Yeah, so I lead, and we did used to call it business value engineering. It's now strategic value advisory, a long name for saying that we're the guys who really help our clients figure out what the value is of a Coupa implementation for their business. I have a team of folks in EMEA who are performing this function. And there's two primary things that we do. The first is we create the annual benchmark report. So that's based on our observations and our analysis of Coupa's best performing clients. As an organization, Coupa's got in excess of $4 trillion in annual spend flowing through the platform from its thousands of customers. And that gives us a really sound basis for calculating the benchmark KPIs. There's 20 of those with a really high level of confidence. This is the industry's only collection of benchmarks based entirely on hard business spend transaction data. So if you've not seen it, I highly recommend downloading it. You can get it from a link on the coupa.com homepage. And even if you're not currently transforming, it does give you insights that are really useful for operational teams. And then sort of moving on, for individual customers, we use the same tooling that we use for the benchmark report to produce a diagnostic of an individual customer's performance relative to their highest performing peers. So this is much more tailored to an individual organization in their geography and against their industry peers. And we marry the data-driven diagnostic with interview-style discovery, which really identifies areas where improvements can drive meaningful outcomes and value for the customer business. But at the end of the day, our success is based entirely on our customers being successful. So having a way to properly measure that current state and then to provide a properly evidenced view of future state performance is really important. The delta between it is the value opportunity. And it also means that we can choose which customers it doesn't make sense to work with because maybe the benefits don't justify the investment. And, you know, for this, we've been using this approach for a long time, and we know it works because customer and supplier adoption levels are high, over 80% in both cases. And that in turn drives compliance and reduces the effort and the cost for delays, helps us identify fraud, helps us reduce the need for remediations. It's just good business. And sometimes that's something that legacy vendors generally struggle with.
Perfect. I actually find it fascinating. It took me a little while to catch on the secret sauce of Coupa, really, apart from all the good stuff. But, you know, something that people don't really twig straight away is the fact that Coupa collects all of that anonymized data for all those transactions that happen through the platform. So as a company using Coupa, you can get amazing prescriptive insights into, you know, what you might do differently, how your business is more or less efficient. And yeah, so that's right up your street. So Chris, I have as with the other presenters today, I have a few questions for you. And the first one is, how do we measure the value of Coupa versus the status quo, or do nothing, or carry on doing it the way you've always done it?
Sure. Okay, so I did put a couple of slides together for this. So Richard, if we could have that first slide, please. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see an extract from the benchmark report. It's basically the summary which shows the 20 benchmarks and the critical business KPIs for spend management. And I get that on the slides, but hard to read. So I'll give you some of the examples. And these are all things that drive business outcomes and drive value for the business. So as one example, our best performing cohort of customers have an on-contract spend of 79.2% on average. So, you know, there's a lot of accuracy, there's a lot of underlying data. This is based on real facts. It's not like a synthetic KPI calculation. Another example is requisition to order cycle time, and we benchmark that at 4.5 hours. And another example, electronic invoice processing at in excess of 80%, first time match rate for invoicing around 87%. And these are all things that from real customers, we can use this data now to look at the delta between where a customer who's looking to adopt Coupa, or maybe has adopted Coupa and is on that transformation journey. We can look at where they are today and look at where the focus of improvement should be for them and how we can help them with that. And that really drives value for the business in terms of those same things I mentioned before: time and cost, compliance, adoption, and we even benchmark ESG and diversity for organizations who are wanting to evolve in that space, or for whom that's important. So on the left-hand side of this slide, the diagram represents workflows for different spend management tasks, all flowing through that one underlying unifying Coupa platform. And the platform and all of our R&D investment, everything goes into that based on all of our years of experience, is optimized to enable Coupa customers to move towards that level of performance that you see in the table on the right-hand side. And as users of the system use it, it surfaces performance indicators alongside the business data. For example, if you're raising a requisition, it might show the supplier risk score, so that you can make a conscious decision about either procuring from a supplier with a low risk versus a high risk, or those sorts of things. Or if you're in an approval, you're an approver, it might show you your personal approval time against the average for the organization, or provide a rating which incents people to improve performance. And that applies across the system in terms of these indicators of good performance or best practice or whatever. And the idea is that by surfacing this information, it softly incentivizes behaviors that drive the indicators in the right direction, and therefore improves the value of the outcomes for the business. And then what that means for customers looking to adopt Coupa, my SVA team will produce a diagnostic which shows how they compare to the benchmarks and where we should focus to get closer to best in class. And that assessment puts a value against each KPI in the context of your business, so your industry, your geography, companies like you who are viewed as best in class in your industry. And having that as is assessment and a very solid prediction of likely future state takes a lot of risk out of any decision to invest in Coupa. And having the data and the tooling to use it has been a big part of our rapid growth, and is something that other vendors don't have access to that data. They can't really do this. The slide underneath the Coupa platform also shows the conceptual links between Coupa and one or more ERP systems. So larger organizations often have many more. For example, Walmart has more than 90 ERP systems, all connecting into Coupa. And across those arrows, the interfaces between Coupa and the ERP systems, globally on an annual basis, there's many, many billions of interactions. And being able to easily and quickly configure that connection, join the ERP system and Coupa together, is part of our value proposition. And in the same way that Ariba is separate from S4HANA, we coexist with underlying finance platforms across all of our customers. And perhaps the difference is that we're agnostic to any underlying platform. We don't mind if it's SAP or Microsoft or Oracle or anyone else. In fact, when Coupa customers change their ERP systems, the Coupa users across the organization often don't even notice the change, which is great for business continuity and for saving on change management costs. And this is something that Chris called out earlier. Clearly, if there's process tuning being done as part of the upgrade, then the users might see some sort of change in their process as a result of that tuning.
Perfect, thanks, Chris. So a question that we asked Emil earlier was about the practical implications of deciding to postpone or not postpone and get on with your Coupa implementation. What are the commercial implications of deciding to upgrade and run Coupa out now rather than waiting until later, until after your ERP implementation?
So where's the money? That's a question that I'm routinely asked, and that's what my team answers. That's a question my team answers. So if we go to the next slide, I've modeled a couple of scenarios here and the benefits of both. Clearly, this is summary information. Sitting behind it, there's a comprehensive build-up of the KPIs and the value contributed by each. And the numbers are based on an organization with an annual spend under management of £550 million. So this is modeled on the type of organization that my team services here in the UK, where I'm based, as an example. For a specific customer situation, we redo these calculations. We update the model for the specific customer and come out with the value that will be released from the project for that specific customer. And what it's showing is, in this example, by implementing full source to pay in advance of changing the ERP solution, not only do you deliver a great customer user experience, and as Chris was saying earlier, but you also deliver earlier the financial benefits that come with improving the KPIs. So if your ERP implementation is scheduled to run over, say, 3 years, and you can get Coupa in at the beginning of that process, you deliver the benefits much more quickly, in sort of 3 years in advance of doing it in the way that it's done in scenario 2. So in this example, the net benefit over 5 years is 36 million, and that's pounds. Whereas if you do the source to contract in parallel with ERP, so this is scenario 2, and delay procure to pay until after the ERP change, then you lose about 25 million pounds worth of those benefits. So to me, this has to be something that customers at least investigate. And we've got lots of examples of where Cooper isolating the business from disruption of other technical change has been, absolutely the right decision for them. So there's one thing that I'm often asked about in this conversation, and that's the reintegration cost. So what about the cost of hooking Cooper up to the upgraded ERP system once that upgrade has happened? And it normally comes in around 10% of the original implementation cost. So in the scheme of things, that's relatively minor. It's not nothing, it's relatively minor. But given that the ERP system will require less configuration because the procurement functions have been offloaded, then it might even cost less overall.
Great, thanks, Chris. Interesting. We did an exercise internally where we checked and measured what the cost would be to lift Cooper from SAP ECC to SAP S/4HANA, and found it was pretty much 10% actually of the original implementation cost. So that's good.
Yeah, it comes back to this thing about part of our sort of value proposition is being able to hook these two things together. We're very focused on it. We put a lot of investment into making sure that works really well.
Perfect. In your previous slide, you mentioned Ariba being external to SAP, but how does Cooper compare with Ariba, out of interest?
Yeah, so and this is a big old conversation in its own right. We heard Chris talking about it earlier, the challenges of having his suppliers interact directly with SAP, and our observations in that space indicate that we get 80% adoption, so 80% of supplier interactions, and the spend under management that goes through the system is from suppliers who are interacting electronically with Cooper and are part of that ecosystem. The numbers we routinely see for customers who are using Ariba, and this is one of the questions we ask them, are much lower, sometimes 25% of what they could be doing with Cooper. So and the value proposition that's on this slide and what we've been talking about all the way through is entirely dependent on how well the technology and the solution and the business process works and is used by the users, whether they are suppliers or internal users. The supplier angle is really important because, as I said earlier, that's what enables electronic ordering and invoicing, and those are big optimization drivers for the cost and risk and compliance and fraud detection and reduction in cycle time. And this has been a real focus for Cooper throughout its development. We're fanatical about usability, making interactions simple, making it easy for suppliers to come on board and to transact. Which makes our platform more attractive, and it makes it easier for our customers to bring on suppliers. As part of our diagnostic, we assess which suppliers are already on Cooper. In other words, they're happy to transact through Cooper with other Cooper customers, which means we've got that supply network in place, and therefore for the new customer, they can bank that value from day one with Cooper. We'll also, as part of that diagnostic and assessment process, show you how to optimize and de-risk your suppliers. All of this is sort of actionable advice that we give free of charge just for becoming a Cooper customer.
Perfect. That's interesting. I guess if something's not used, it has no purpose. And I've heard say of Cooper in the past. I don't know who said it, so I wish I could remember, but the best user interface is no user interface. Or in other words, if you make something so simple to use that anybody can do it just straight out of the box, then they're going to use it. Whereas if you make something difficult and complicated, they either don't use it and find a workaround, or just do something different. And
Yeah.
I guess that's where
you're absolutely right. And part of our sort of internal ethos is we need business spend management to be as easy as using Amazon. You know, everyone's grown up in that world. It's familiar to us, and you get, you know, the little, sometimes they're frustrating, but you get the little pointers when you're on Amazon about maybe you need this product, or, you know, and it's that kind of ethos that goes into the way Cooper's architected and the user interface is designed.
Perfect. One last question for you, Chris. You're going to save some money by implementing Cooper early. Do you think that could pay for your SAP ECC to SAP S/4HANA migration?
I wish I could answer that. I don't know how much the upgrade would cost. You know, in a particular scenario, if SAP's been really heavily customized, then it might be an expensive upgrade. But if you're banking £25 million, it must go some way towards helping pay for that. And I'm sure for some customers it would cover the entire cost.
You would have to hope so. You would have to hope so. Perfect. Thanks very much, Chris. I'm going to hand back to Ren now. I don't know if Ren's back on video, and we're going to see if there's some questions out there, and then yeah, over to you, Ren.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chris. So insightful. Thanks, Rich, for handling that for us. Emil, if you could pop your screen back on, that'd be great. I'm going to throw some questions out at you folks from our participants. Chris, I'll start with you. Where do the dollar, pound, rand value savings come from? How are they calculated?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's kind of what my team focuses on, you know, day in, day out. And the reality is there are many drivers underpinning this KPI model that I'm talking about. It's the model is set up to model the complexity of the real world. So, you know, answering this fully would take quite some time, but I can probably give you some examples. So sourcing and spend on contract enables you to obtain preferential terms with suppliers. And our sort of benchmark improvement for that, for someone who hasn't done a lot in this space, they routinely saving 10 to 20% of spend value. So that's a massive contribution. If you imagine all of your non-contract spend becoming contract spend and saving between 10 and 20% on that, that can be substantial. And as an added value, Cooper runs an advantage program, which is sourcing events that are jointly subscribed by many customers. So let's say you're going out to procure janitorial services, and this is a program that's coming up later in the year. And there's lots of customers all going to market in a particular region for this similar set of services. Then Cooper facilitates the negotiation of improved rates for everyone. And we've got customers who get engaged with this program and save millions of dollars every year. You know, we've got multiple examples of where customers are paying their entire Cooper subscription cost from the savings just from this one program. So that's another example. Things like electronic purchase order and invoicing generate savings from reduction in manual tasks and fraud reduction. But there's a bunch of other drivers in there. And this is what I say about the model being complex. There's lots of things sort of netting up there. Supplier rationalization. So I said back at the beginning, we'll help you figure out which suppliers you actually need and what you should be transacting with them. That's part of the diagnostic and the assessment process that we go through. That then reduces your onboarding and your supply maintenance costs. And, you know, that can be substantial. If you look at Hackett Group, their benchmark cost for onboarding is a one-time cost of $800 per supplier. So reduce the number of suppliers, you're reducing the number of times it costs you that amount of money. And in addition, every time a supplier changes something fundamental about their data, maybe it's just a phone number, maybe it's a tax reference or something, then you've got maintenance costs around that as well. And as we get more and more strict around things like know your customer and know your supplier and master data validation, we need to be more robust in this space. So there's some real value around limiting the number of organizations that you transact with, getting rid of the long tail. And then there's things like advanced analytics, which is a module in Coupa that gives you much more detailed and focused analytics on the nature of your spend, who it's with, and things like the categories you're spending on. And by having those insights, then you can make better decisions. And there's a separate independent value proposition around that particular module, which in many cases is generating in excess of 1% of your spend value in terms of benefits. And there's many more. It's a complex model. I won't bore you with more detail on that.
So it sounds like the answer is everywhere.
Yeah, and when just sort of blowing our own trumpet for just a second here, when we go through this modeling exercise for customers, we are routinely coming back with millions or tens of millions of dollars in benefit. I saw one for a significant organization in the US where the value released from Coupa was in excess of $400 million. And the customer came back to us partway through their ramp process and said, we've met that number and we're going north of it now. So, this is real. This is real.
Yeah,
Wow.
Special. I have another one for you, Chris.
Sure.
How do I get a Coupa value diagnostic?
Talk to me. No, so this is for organizations who are looking to adopt Coupa, we provide this as a zero cost service. And it's the sort of thing you could go and procure from a management consultancy. They would come in and do an assessment, this sort of stuff. And I'm not trying to sabotage their business. However, the thing to remember is that we have access to all of that underlying KPI data that makes this much more real. So the way to access it is to reach out to your account exec if you've got a direct relationship with Coupa, or through the team at SCP, so Richard and the team, or if you're working with another partner, then they would have a route in as well. Or just, hey, drop me a note. I can get you in touch with the right people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Emil, I have a couple for you. Is there any advice to ensure a smooth Coupa implementation? What can we do to avoid blocks and overruns? Emil, you're on mute, my friend.
Apologies for that.
No problem.
Mistake. So yeah, I think I was saying there's a couple of things you can do, kind of generic things or approaches you can take to try and limit the chances of overruns. So number one would be during the sales cycle, or you from a customer point of view, the sourcing cycle of trying to find an application and going through the process of identifying a Coupa or any other application that'll suit your needs. Do the homework that's required. And by that, I mean, prepare kind of detailed scenarios and detailed questions around specific challenges that you have in your business when you engage with implementation partners and software suppliers, so that you can make or guide the discussions towards illustrations of how they would solve those specific things, and not generic demos and generic approach discussions. That also, it also helps implementation partners and software suppliers if they have that detail, because they can then have a more valuable discussion with you specifically towards your business and your challenges you face. Number two, I'd say make sure to plan enough effort for data and content enablement. So we've touched on that a few times today, but just to make sure again that point sinks in, it's always more effort than you anticipate. And it's as crucial as having a good design in your system is having a user being able to easily get to what they want to buy and selecting it and having the process flow from there. And then I'd say the last thing is be careful of falling into the trap of trying to use all the bells and whistles that you can get when you start out with Coupa. So it often makes it complicated to try and fit all those things in. So rather take an approach of what do we need as an organization in procurement to resolve our pain points, and let's start there and make sure that we do that as smoothly and efficiently as we possibly can. And then the bells and whistles can come, and you can add them as you go along, and you find good uses for them.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Emil. Last one for you. What are the characteristics of a good project versus a bad project?
Let's say I'll do the good project, and everything else is then bad project, opposite to that. So from a good project point of view, I'd say there are two key things. So you can break it down into a lot of detailed things you want to look at, but two things summarize that. Number one is, if you look at post a project at the pain points that you initially listed as the main reasons why you went looking for a solution like Cooper, you need to then determine how well you are tracking to resolving those post your implementation. So are you making progress on the ones that basically was prioritized to resolve? And then I'd say the second thing is user adoption. And by users, I mean your internal users and the suppliers again, because if you get adoption right, if you've got a high adoption, it means that inevitably things like design and content enablement and change management and all those kind of things during the project was done well. Otherwise, people won't use your system. So I think that is a very good indicator of holistically how well did you implement.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Emil. Well, folks, that's the end. It brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you again for joining us. And thank you also to our panelists, Chris Fordemanch, Emil, and Chris Clark. Really appreciate your time and your invaluable insights. And then a special thank you to Richard, whose brainchild this webinar is. And I also want to thank Francois Engelbrecht, who's been furiously hard at work behind the scenes. He's stuck all of this experience together from beginning to end, working furiously behind the scenes, and it's really ensuring that nothing falls over. We appreciate you, Francois. Please enjoy the Q&A document, the white paper. It provides great content to inform your journey and your decisions going forward. We look forward to hearing about your successes. Please reach out to us on your migration or your upgrade journey. And remember, we're just a phone call or an email away, as you can see on that thank you screen in front of you. Please feel free to reach out to any of the participants today. And if you'd like to have a deeper conversation, you can get hold of any of us, as I mentioned. We appreciate your time. We got it done in under an hour. Take care and look forward to hearing about your success. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.